Sitting nearly 2 kilometres long across the Blue Nile, the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a source of pride for Ethiopians. Through bonds and cash contributions, they covered most of the $4 billion price tag.
Ethiopia has inaugurated Africa's largest hydroelectric dam, a $5 billion mega project expected to more than double the nation's power supply. The Grand Renaissance Dam, built on a Nile tributary near the Sudanese border, will generate over 5,000 megawatts, powering homes, businesses, and even the country's growing fleet of electric vehicles. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed hailed the launch as a big achievement, saying the dam shows what Africans can accomplish. Leaders from across the continent attended the ceremony, with South Sudan and Kenya announcing plans to import Ethiopian power. But the project has stirred controversy. Egypt, heavily dependent on the Nile for water, calls the dam an existential threat and accuses Ethiopia of violating international law by moving forward without consensus. Abiy sought to reassure neighbors, vowing Ethiopia will share prosperity, not cause harm. For many Ethiopians, the launch is a source of pride.
The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a source of pride and unity for Ethiopians. The $5 billion megastructure built in a tributary of the River Nile will meet the energy needs of the country's 120 million people. Currently, just under half have access to electricity.
Previously, our daily lives relied on kerosene lamps and charcoal, which posed significant challenges. We would transport firewood to the market, selling it to buy kerosene and bread for our children. But with the completion of the dam, our entire community is now happy.
The reservoir of Africa's largest hydroelectric dam has flooded an area larger than Greater London. It should eventually produce 5,150 megawatts of electricity. But despite the fanfare, it's not been an easy road. The project, which began in 2011, faced strong pushback from downstream neighbours in the region, particularly Egypt. 90% of Egypt's fresh water comes from the Nile, and there are fears it could restrict its water supply during periods of drought. They also argue it violates water treaties dated back to the British colonial period. Ethiopia says the dam is a sovereign right.
I want to make it abundantly clear that we have no intention to harm these countries. What we are essentially doing is to meet our electricity demands from one of the cleanest sources of energy. We cannot afford to continue keeping more than 65 million of our people in the dark.
Several attempts to reach an agreement over the years have failed. Egypt's foreign ministry spokesperson said his country would closely monitor the situation and would take appropriate measures to protect the interests of the country.
Now, Ethiopia officially inaugurated Africa's largest hydroelectric dam on Tuesday to provide energy to millions of Ethiopians. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will double Ethiopia's electricity output, thereby playing a crucial role in the country's development. Prime Minister in his address mentioned that the dam was built to prosper, to electrify the entire region and to change the history of black people and absolutely not to harm its brothers. Abiy said Ethiopia will use the energy to improve Ethiopians' access to electricity and export surplus power to the region.
Photos, videos and words do not do the dam justice. Only those who see it in person can understand its worth. I hope and pray that this generation comes to see the dam, and I invite all black people to do the same. It alone demonstrates that we, as black people, can achieve anything we plan. It is the biggest achievement in the history of black people.
On Ethiopia's western frontier, where the Blue Nile cuts towards Sudan, rises one of Africa's most audacious feats of engineering, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a hydroelectric power generation giant carved into the river's path. Designed to be the largest on the continent, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is Ethiopia's boldest attempt yet to harness the potential of the Nile's waters and use that to power its economy. This colossal gravity dam is built of roller-compacted concrete, anchored by 2 powerhouses, 3 spillways, and a vast saddle dam. Its main wall towers 145 meters into the sky and stretches 1.7 kilometers across, a structure that has cost more than $4.8 billion. But that cost was not borne by foreign creditors. It was carried by the hands of Ethiopians themselves, ordinary citizens, public servants, and diaspora communities who bought bonds and pooled their resources to transform a national dream into reality. Construction began in 2011. At its heart, the project was simple yet transformative: to light up a nation where electricity remains scarce. Yet, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is more than just concrete and steel. It's a statement of sovereignty, of self-reliance, and national pride. Once fully operational, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will unleash more than 6,000 megawatts of power, enough to electrify Ethiopia and power its neighbors. It promises energy independence, rural electrification, and industrial growth. For the region, this means cheaper power, deeper integration, and another step towards Africa's collective energy freedom. Beyond electricity generation, GAD will also boost the amount of water available for irrigation, sustaining millions of farmers in Ethiopia and beyond. Yet, this monument to progress has stirred controversy. Egypt and Sudan fear the dam could affect their water security. They worry that their share of water from the Nile could drop. But other nations in the region see in the dam an opportunity, a catalyst for cooperation and shared prosperity. Egypt sees the dam as a potential existential threat. The Nile delivers more than 80% of its water. Any reduction threatens its agriculture, its economy, its people. A nation whose population is projected to reach 150 million by 2050. Cairo has fought the project on the diplomatic front and even took the issue to the United Nations Security Council. It has been demanding a regional water-sharing pact. Ethiopia, however, held its course. Alternatives proposed by Egypt, such as smaller dams and conservation measures, were dismissed. And now, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam stands complete. At its inauguration, African leaders, diplomats, engineers, and the millions of Ethiopians who willed this dream from blueprint to reality will watch as a dream that had been drafted on paper roars into life to power the dreams of a nation that is home to Africa's second largest population. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN.
Now, after 14 years of construction, Ethiopia has officially inaugurated a controversial mega dam built over the River Nile. The ceremony was broadcast live on TV. Africa's largest hydroelectric project has a capacity to produce more than 5,000 megawatts of power. The government in Addis Ababa says the project on the Blue Nile will provide electricity to millions of people across the region, not just in Ethiopia. The dam will be Africa's largest hydroelectric plant, but the dam has also been at the centre of a diplomatic row between Sudan and Egypt, who both fear their essential water supplies could be affected. Kalkadan Yipaltal reports from Addis Ababa.
Ethiopia's capital and biggest city, Addis Ababa, is full of excitement as a $4 billion mega dam over the Blue Nile reaches the finish line after 14 years. For a country scarred by a devastating civil war that ended just 3 years ago and continues to face unrest, the project, officially known as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, generates a rare sense of unity for the majority of the people. And tens of millions across the country's rural villages and remote towns are hoping they will see the benefit. One villager, Getenesh, lives in a Lamura village less than 10 kilometers outside Hawassa, a major city in southern Ethiopia. Her household, like many others in her village, does not have access to electricity. They use kerosene-powered lamps for light and firewood for cooking. It's been very tough, especially for her 3 children.
When we run out of fuel, we might spend nights in darkness. Sometimes we use firewood as a source of light. Sometimes we can't even have enough wood.
For more than a decade, her husband, Garmesa, who is a farmer and a part-time carpenter, has been contributing to the national fundraising campaign for the construction of the dam from his monthly income. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been collected from the public through donations and the sale of government-issued bonds. Getenesh and Garmesa are now hoping to have access to electricity. The dam began generating power to a small extent 3 years ago, and it's expected to operate with full capacity soon. Power generated from the hydroelectric plant is expected to feed into the national grid. But Ethiopia still needs to expand its networks to reach areas without electricity. That will be the next step.
For 54% of our people, they have access to electricity.
They do have access?
They do have access. Yeah. So we can take 46% is in deficit. That is what we want to reduce now in the coming 5 years. Our intention is by 2030, at least more than 90% of our nation should get access to electricity. That is how we are working upon that.
Besides providing households with electricity, Ethiopia aims to become an economic powerhouse in the Horn of Africa region, for which generating massive amounts of power could be important. The hydropower project is also expected to boost electricity exports to regional neighbors, but it has created issues for countries downstream. Over the years, there have been several rounds of talks among Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt to address issues raised around the building of this hydroelectric dam. However, none of these efforts have been successful, and a binding agreement has not been signed. Accusations continue to be traded, and relations remain tense. Sudan and Egypt fear the dam could affect water levels on the Nile, particularly in times of drought, something Ethiopia denies. In a recent joint statement, the two countries said the dam will continue to create a threat to their water supplies. Officials in Addis Ababa say the costs of the construction were covered by the government and contributions from the public. Now, the country is set to generate a massive source of income in addition to providing power to millions of its citizens. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Southern Ethiopia.
Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam finally comes on stream after undergoing construction for almost 15 years. But does this dam matter? Not just to Ethiopia, but to the entire continent. Commonly referred to as GERD, the power plant is Africa's largest hydroelectric power plant, capable of generating over 5,100 megawatts of electricity. The project has been in works for over a decade, amid controversies between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan in water management that almost led to war. The project is finally being completed, and its inauguration comes just 2 days before the Ethiopian New Year. To put this great work into perspective, GERD will more than double Ethiopia's current power output, lighting up millions of homes and fueling industry. The country also hopes to sell excess power to neighboring countries. Could this be the beginning of Africa's leap towards energy independence and economic self-reliance, breaking free from decades of dependence on foreign aid, tariffs, and global regulations? Yet, the story is not without tension. Egypt, which depends on the Nile for over 90% of its water supply, views the dam as a potential threat. With GERD's massive reservoir storing more water than Egypt's annual Nile share, fears of water shortages and drought loom large. How can upstream and downstream nations balance their needs fairly on a river that sustains hundreds of millions? The dam symbolizes more than electricity. It embodies a shifting power dynamic in Africa. Ethiopia's fast-paced economic growth, averaging nearly 10% GDP increase for over a decade, combined with recent African Union meetings focused on regional integration, suggest a continent ready to chart its own future. The question now is clear. Will the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam be a beacon of African unity and progress, or a catalyst for division in the region? The world watches as Ethiopia, and indeed all of Africa, writes the next chapter of its story, one where control over resources and destiny may finally rest in African hands. Yolanda Robert, Arise News.
Well, Africa's largest hydroelectric project, the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, has been inaugurated. The dam is a massive engineering project that has been under construction for over a decade. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and regional leaders attended the inauguration ceremony. The dam is meant to double Ethiopia's electricity output and help supply power to millions. The dam has long been controversial, facing pushback from Ethiopia's neighbours along the Blue Nile River. It promises an energy revolution for the country, but for more than a decade it has also been a source of deep tensions with nearby Egypt and Sudan, which are downstream from Ethiopia, and fear the negative consequences from the mega dam.
Ethiopia's dam is a project of historic proportions. At more than 145 metres high and stretching nearly 2 kilometres across the Blue Nile River, it's not just Africa's largest hydroelectric dam, it's one of the biggest in the world. The government promised it would transform the economy and the lives of the population.
What we are essentially doing is to meet our electricity demands from one of the cleanest sources of energy. We cannot afford to continue keeping more than 65 million of our people in the dark.
But since its conception and the start of construction in 2011, it has been dogged by controversy. Egypt and Sudan both rejected an initial deal to start building the dam over fears that it would threaten their water supplies. Egypt, for one, depends on the Nile for 97% of its water and has repeatedly described the dam as an existential threat. Despite efforts over the last decade to defuse tensions, Egypt's president has always been clear about the stakes.
You will develop and grow, and I am with you. But beware that in Egypt, the people live only on the water that comes from this river.
Over the last 5 years, Ethiopia has begun filling the dam despite the lack of agreement with its downstream neighbours. And in 2022, for the first time, started generating electricity. The Prime Minister said the dam would eventually provide power for the estimated 45% of Ethiopians currently with no access to electricity, and also in future allow the country to become Africa's biggest exporter of energy. He also tried once again to reassure Ethiopia's neighbours.
As you can see, this water will generate energy while flowing as it previously flowed to Sudan and Egypt.
For many in Ethiopia, the dam has also become a source of national pride, especially as it was reportedly financed largely by Ethiopia itself without significant outside funding. Yet despite the upside for Ethiopians, critics fear the tensions, with Egypt in particular, could spill over into something bigger.
Well, Moses Crispus Okello is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Addis Ababa. His work focuses on conflict resolution and regional security. Welcome to DW. Before we dive into the problems the dam has caused, let's first recognise what this mega project means, if we could. How significant is it for Ethiopia?
Thanks for having me. For Ethiopia, this is a monumental project. It's a dam that not only promises to transform the lives of approximately 120 million people, it's a dam that also holds a great significance symbolically in the sense that it was domestically funded. So the psychological impact of this undertaking alone is grave. Throughout the whole week, leading up to today, the news in Ethiopia has really been about this dam. I mean, this just demonstrates the extent to which the dam will not only change Ethiopia's profile economically, but also the extent to which it is able to galvanize the population in the country politically. So this is for Ethiopia indeed a history-changing moment. You could say that between today on September 9th, 2025, there was an Ethiopia before and an Ethiopia after.
Moses, we've heard in that report that the dam has raised concerns about water security for Ethiopia's neighbours, Sudan and Egypt. How justified are these concerns?
Yes, indeed. From the very beginning of the construction of this dam, water security for Egypt, primarily and secondarily Sudan, have been a major concern. Egypt, that as you correctly say, depends on the Nile for 90% or so of its freshwater sources, believes that the dam will reduce the amount of flow of water that goes down to Cairo and further on to Alexandria. So this is a big concern for Egypt. But Egypt also has another concern in the sense that the Nile also is a symbolic natural resource that politically holds the country together. So the Nile is both a source of water and also a source of identity for Egypt. For Sudan, on the other hand, Sudan floods every year about May to September timeframe, and the Nile, the God, therefore, has two different meanings for them. On the one hand, there's a belief that it might help control the flooding in Khartoum, but on the other, there is a fear that should the God have a fault of any sort, then Khartoum will be flooding. So both Egypt have concerns. Ethiopia has attempted to assuage these concerns, arguing that the engineering fit that the God is has safeguards that are able to manage the flow of water. So whether that is true indeed is something that has to be seen going forward. But all the sides in this entanglement believe in their positions, and that's where the tensions and the disagreement between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia come from.
Yeah, part of your field of expertise is conflict resolution. I wonder how much does historical mistrust and regional politics affect negotiations and the viewpoints of what this dam's going to bring?
Yeah, I mean, the disagreements over the construction of the dam have never changed. From 2011, when the first stone was put on the ground, to date. So 15 years down the road, and we're still arguing about the same thing, whether the dam will reduce the water flow, or whether the dam should be used by another country for its economic benefits. So this is not one of those solutions that those problems that are easy to address. So today the dam has been complete. It's a fait accompli, but the issues remain. I do not, in my mind, foresee Ethiopia compromising on the core operation of the dam, which is now what both Khartoum and Cairo are demanding. They believe that now is a national, is a sovereign issue that cannot be compromised on. So going forward, our belief is that these three countries will continue disagreeing about this dam, and perhaps also fueled by other concerns, geopolitical as well as hegemony concerns, that will then carry them for years on end as neighbors that disagree. Right. Whether they resolve this or not is speculative.
Moses Crispus Okello from the Institute for Security Studies in Addis Ababa. It's been great to get your input. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Ethiopia is set to inaugurate Africa's biggest hydroelectric dam. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will power homes and industries across East Africa, but is sparking tensions with Egypt and Sudan over the flow of the River Nile. For more, our chief Africa correspondent Jennifer Zabazaja joins us from Johannesburg. I mean, Jennifer, this has been 14 years in the making, finally being inaugurated. Talk to us about the significance of this dam, perhaps before we talk about some of the controversies surrounding it.
Exactly, Jumana. Today is really the culmination of a years-long push, as you were just alluding to there. 14 years of delays. There's been disputes, even potentially war threats, and reportedly even deaths. But Ethiopia is officially going to be inaugurating this $4 billion hydropower dam, set to be the biggest hydropower plant on the continent, and also one of the biggest in the world. Now, the significance of it is what you had just pointed out there. They are hoping, the ambitions of this project is to hopefully generate power for Africa's second most populous nation that can help, of course, electrify a number of Ethiopians that do not have power, but also they're hoping to become a major player in the hydropower export industry, not just regionally, but hopefully globally. And we've actually heard from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who suggests it could generate $1 billion a year and also help the country with foreign currency inflows. And a lot of this was really how the country was able to leverage the Ethiopians, right? This has been fully funded by Ethiopians. There were no international funders that were brought into the mix. They were able to get donations and also cash bonds that people were able to buy. And so for many people, this is a rare opportunity of unity for Ethiopians, especially if we take a look at 2026 being a year where they're going to have an election. But of course, as you pointed out there, there's quite a lot of controversy around this dam.
Okay, let's talk about that, because neighboring countries, Egypt and Sudan, are not happy at all. And I believe they put out a statement saying that the dam's construction actually violated international law. Why so much controversy, Jen?
Right. And this has been an opposition from Egypt and Sudan for years. This is not the first time that we have heard their opposition. There have been many times, though, over the past 14 years of construction that they've tried to get all of these neighboring countries on board to agree with the constructs of this dam. But that has not been able to elicit any sort of agreement. And really, if we take a look at it from the perspective of Egypt, and this map is perfect to show it, Egypt, 80% of Egypt's water needs are met by the Nile. And so the Nile River, of course, is integral to this part of the world, and also really globally if you take a look at it constructively. But also there's concern that some of these downstream players, as you can see there, Egypt and Sudan, potentially could have their own water needs affected if we do in fact see Ethiopia restricting some water downstream. And so as you were pointing out there, they are still opposed to it. So the question is, are there still going to be some more statements that are put out there, and internationally will we hear more?
Ethiopia has officially inaugurated Africa's largest hydroelectric dam, a massive project expected to supply energy to millions of people. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, built on a tributary of the Nile River, represents a $5 billion investment and is seen by Ethiopia as a cornerstone of its economic development. With over 120 million citizens, the country is aiming to expand access to electricity and position itself as a regional energy exporter. Since the first turbine began operating in 2022, the dam's power output has steadily increased. It has now reached its full capacity of 5,150 megawatts, placing it among the top 20 hydroelectric dams worldwide. Ethiopia maintains the dam will boost domestic energy access and help power the broader region through electricity exports.
Ethiopia has pushed the switch on Africa's largest hydroelectric dam, marking a historic milestone in the continent's energy ambitions and reigniting tensions along the Nile. At the official inauguration of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed pledged the project would not disrupt water flows to Egypt and Sudan. But after years of stalled talks and deep mistrust, his words may not be enough to calm fears downstream. NTV's Ashley Atieno with that story.
On the banks of the Blue Nile, a new chapter begins, not just for Ethiopia, but for the entire Horn of Africa. Water now surges through the turbines of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GAD, the crown jewel of Ethiopia's energy ambitions and the continent's largest hydroelectricity facility. Built at a cost of $5 billion, the dam now reaches full generating capacity, 5,150 megawatts, enough to power homes, factories and futures across East Africa. But the moment is as political as it is technical. Standing before a gathering of regional leaders and citizens, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed directly addressed the two nations most concerned, Egypt and Sudan.
To our brothers in the downstream, to our Nubian Sudan brothers, and to our Misri Egypt brothers, who are worried out of innocent concerns, Ethiopia built the Renaissance Dam to prosper and to enlighten the region, never to hurt its brothers. I would like to confirm to you in front of the Ethiopian people that we will never retain your fair share of the water at any point.
Ethiopia sees the dam not just as infrastructure but as destiny, a unifying national project funded in part by citizens through bonds and donations. But for Egypt, where the Nile provides more than 90% of fresh water needs, and for Sudan, the GAD has long been seen as a looming threat, a unilateral act on a shared lifeline. Still, Ethiopia pushed forward. The final reservoir filling was completed in 2023, despite years of diplomatic stalemate. Independent assessments show no major disruptions downstream for now, helped by cautious water management and above-average rainfall. Kenya, South Sudan, Somalia all see opportunity. With power-hungry economies and development goals to meet, the GAD's surplus electricity could be a regional game changer.
We are ready to sign a power purchase agreement so that we can take some of the power from this important dam. Reliability is especially critical for special economic zones, industrial parks, ICT hubs, and agro-processing facilities, all of which require consistent and affordable power to drive Kenya's development agenda.
But as water flows freely through the turbines, political tension still trickles. No binding legal agreement has been reached. Trust remains fragile and downstream doubts persist. Ashley Atieno, NTV.
How are you?
In 2011, Ethiopia began building a huge dam in the River Nile known as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in order to provide electricity to more of its citizens. This was a huge construction project. It cost about $4 billion and was set to be Africa's largest hydroelectric power dam. Ethiopia wants the reservoir to be filled as quickly as possible to generate maximum electricity, but their neighbors, and I'm talking about Sudan and Egypt, have expressed concern. Egypt relies on the Nile for pretty much all of its drinking water, all of its irrigation. They believe that this dam will drastically reduce their water supplies. Sudan, on the other hand, is worried about the dam's safety and whether or not the water flow will actually impact their own dams and their own water stations. Both countries are worried about the dam giving Ethiopia too much power over the Blue Nile. That's the part of the Nile that starts off at Ethiopia's Lake Tana and then flows north through Sudan, merges with the White Nile before going into Egypt. There has been so much negotiation, so much debate, and no resolution. Ethiopia is still going ahead building this dam. They're still going to be filling the reservoir with water as well. And some analysts fear the possibility of military conflict as a result. Time now now for Zane's Exchange, where we take a look at what's at stake for Sudan in the dispute over the Nile Dam. The three countries involved are now deadlocked over what comes next. Earlier, I spoke with Sudan's Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, and I began by asking him if he believes Egypt's threat to go to war over this. Take a listen.
The issues that are related to the GERD, or the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, are very serious. And I think when President Sisi made that statement, he would like us to express to the rest of the world the seriousness of this issue. It is time-bound, and it is linked to the safety, security of millions of our people in both Sudan and Egypt. And I think we would like the rest of the world to understand the gravity of the situation, and to the point that the issues that are related to care are solvable. We can easily resolve them in a matter of weeks. So, and also I think we would like to see this resolved within the remit of the international law.
Okay, so speaking of the resolution, your government has talked about getting international partners and mediators to intervene, perhaps some kind of intervention from the UN Security Council. Obviously, the AU has hosted talks, getting more cooperation from the US, at the UN and the EU as well. But Ethiopia says that, you know, this is an African problem and it should be solved by African leaders only. Do they have a point?
You know, we are the first to propose the motto of African solutions for African problems. AU is our premier institution. We respect it. What we proposed is to add to the role of the AU the mediators who were there. They were observers. They are observing this process with us for the last year or so. What we would like them just to elevate their role from an observer who are sitting there passively to operate as mediators who could help us reach an agreement and reach it soon.
So let me ask you this, Prime Minister. For several years, Sudan was perfectly happy to go about, for Ethiopia to go about building this dam. Sudan had sort of supported this idea that Ethiopia needed a way of providing electricity for more of its citizens. Now it seems as though there's been this sort of sudden about change in your support. What brought that about?
Yes, the dam brings a lot of benefits to the three countries for that matter. But for these benefits to materialize, we have to reach a binding agreement that would allow us to plan our life, to be able to utilize the water that is coming from the dam in a way that will allow agricultural production, the livelihood, and all that. Without that agreement, we will always be at the mercy of Ethiopia to give it today and close it tomorrow. This is why we are asking for a binding agreement within the international law.
The tensions over the dam are not the only reason why Sudan and Ethiopia are at loggerheads right now. There's also issues when it comes to disputed borders. There are border clashes between Ethiopia and Sudan happening right now. Are you confident that that won't lead to war either?
You know, in Sudan border 7 countries. The only border area among the 7 countries that has no dispute, which was resolved years back to 1902. We had an agreement that led us to demarcate these borders on the map and on the ground. Successive Ethiopian governments have recognized this. We do not understand why is it suddenly become an issue. In fact, we had established a mechanism, a joint border committee that met twice at least over the last 6 months. And we were moving forward to resolve this. And still we think there is ample room for dialogue and for resolving this peacefully.
And another question, I just want to pivot slightly, is Israel. Sudan recently normalized relations with Israel. The Palestinians somewhat felt betrayed by that. what do you make of the Palestinian response to Sudan's normalization with relations with Israel?
You know, this great revolution of Sudan, which brought the dictatorship, opened Sudan to the rest of the world. And we have adopted a foreign policy that is transformed Sudan into a country that is at peace with itself, with its neighbors, and all that. When it comes to the issue of normalization with Israel, normalization is not an event, it's a process. We have started this, but the final say on this whole process will be left to the Sudanese people through their institutions.
And Prime Minister, you talked about sort of some of the changes that Sudan has made, obviously transitioning from a dictatorship to a democracy, being removed as a state sponsor of terrorism, being now open to the rest of the world, having a relationship and a dialogue with the international community. What do you hope that relationship with the international community, what sort of benefits do you hope that will bring to Sudan over the long term?
You know, thank you very much for bringing this. You are absolutely right. Sudan is passing through multiple transitions, from conflict and wars to peace, from dictatorship to democracy and good governance, from isolation to relinking to the rest of the world, and also from collapsing economy and hardships, hopefully, to prosperity. Opening up to the rest of the world will open Sudan for investment. And as you know, over the last year and a half, we've been able to negotiate with the United States the removal of Sudan from the list of the states sponsoring terrorism. It's a game changer.
Finally, I want to talk about Omar al-Bashir, who was the dictator who ruled Sudan for many years and has been accused of war crimes, violence, mass killings that led to the deaths of 300,000 Sudanese people during the conflict in Darfur. Are you committed at this point, Prime Minister, to making sure that Omar al-Bashir is handed over to the International Criminal Court to face justice?
You know, the three slogans of this revolution were justice, freedom, and equality. And I think we will not rest until we see justice being served to the utmost satisfaction of the victims' families. We have been in direct talks with the ICC. The prosecutor came to visit us. She's coming next month to visit us again. And we are in negotiations with them. We are very determined that justice will be served, and to the satisfaction of our families' victims, we will do anything that will lead us to that satisfaction and that result.
Prime Minister Hamdok, appreciate you being on the program.
Ethiopia just opened the Grand Renaissance Dam, Africa's biggest hydroelectric dam. The ceremony on September 9th was led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, with African leaders, including the presidents of Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and South Sudan, joining the celebration. This ambitious project took Ethiopia 14 years to complete and cost 233 billion birr, all funded domestically. The dam has a height of 145 meters and spans 1.8 kilometers in length. It is set to generate 5,150 megawatts of power, producing 15,760 gigawatt hours each year, which will light up millions of homes across Ethiopia.
Ethiopia officially inaugurated Africa's largest hydroelectric dam on Tuesday. The project, dubbed the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, aims to provide energy to millions, but widens a rift with downstream nations. At Tuesday's ceremony, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed addressed what he said were the concerns of those in Sudan and Egypt.
Ethiopia built the Renaissance Dam to prosper and to enlighten the region, never to hurt its brothers. I would like to confirm to you in front of the Ethiopian people that we will never retain your fair share of the water at any point.
Ethiopia is the continent's second most populous nation with over 120 million people.
and it sees the $5 billion dam on a tributary of the Nile as central to its economic ambitions. Abiy says the dam will boost access to electricity for the almost half of Ethiopians who had none as recently as 2022. The government says a reservoir the size of Greater London created by the project will provide a steady water supply while limiting floods and drought. But downstream, neighbors have watched the project advance with dread since construction began in 2011. Egypt, which built its own Aswan High Dam on the Nile in the 1960s, fears the GERD could restrict its water supply. Cairo has bitterly opposed the dam from the start, arguing that it violates water treaties and poses an existential threat. Egypt's foreign ministry wrote to the UN Security Council saying the inauguration of the dam violated international law. War-torn Sudan, meanwhile, has joined Egypt's calls for legally binding agreements on the dam's operation, but could also benefit from access to cheap energy.